The thunderous roar of the GAU-8 Avenger cannon filled Captain Sarah Mitchell's cockpit as 30mm rounds screamed toward the enemy position at 4,000 rounds per minute. Below her, in the dusty streets of Qadisiyah village, 12 American soldiers huddled behind the remnants of a concrete wall while machine gun fire from 3 separate buildings kept them pinned in a deadly crossfire. Her radio crackled with Lieutenant Jake Rodriguez's desperate voice, cutting through the static. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Hammer 21, we need immediate close air support. We've got wounded and no way out. Request danger close gun run on Building Complex Charlie." Sarah banked her A-10C Thunderbolt II into a steep diving turn, her eyes scanning the target through her targeting pod display. The enemy had chosen their positions well, using a school and a medical clinic as shields while raining death on the American patrol below. Standard rules of engagement prohibited strikes on civilian infrastructure, even when abandoned. But through her advanced optics, Sarah could see Rodriguez dragging Sergeant Mike Torres behind cover, dark crimson spreading across Torres's uniform as sniper fire continued to hunt them. "Negative on close air support," came Colonel James Harrison's voice from the Tactical Operations Center back at Eagle's Nest. "Hammer 21, you are ordered to maintain holding pattern only. Do not engage civilian structures. Repeat, do not engage." Sarah pulled her aircraft into a tight orbit above the village, watching helplessly as enemy fighters moved between the buildings with impunity. They knew the Americans wouldn't risk collateral damage, and they were using that knowledge to methodically eliminate the trapped patrol. Torres had stopped moving behind his cover, and Rodriguez was now alone, trying to provide first aid while bullets chipped concrete inches from his head. "Sir, they're going to die down there," Sarah transmitted, her hand tightening on the stick. "I have clear visual on muzzle flashes from the school building. No civilian movement detected. Request permission to engage with precision gun runs. Captain Mitchell, you will maintain your current position and wait for ground reinforcements. That is a direct order. Do not engage those structures." Through her cockpit canopy, Sarah could see F-16 Fighting Falcons circling at higher altitude, their pilots undoubtedly frustrated by the same restrictions that kept them from helping the men below. But F-16s carried bombs and missiles, weapons designed for destroying entire buildings. Sarah's A-10 was different. The massive cannon mounted in her aircraft's nose could place individual rounds with surgical precision, eliminating threats while preserving the structures around them. Rodriguez's voice came over the radio again, weaker now, tinged with the desperation of a man watching his soldiers die. "Hammer 21, Sergeant Torres is bleeding out. We need that gun run now, or we're all dead." Sarah made her choice. She rolled the A-10 into a steep dive, lining up her gun sight with the muzzle flashes erupting from the school's second-floor windows. The GAU-8 cannon was a masterpiece of engineering, capable of firing depleted uranium rounds that could penetrate tank armor. Against human targets behind concrete walls, it was devastatingly effective. "Hammer 21 is inbound hot," she announced calmly. "Danger close gun run, 30mm high explosive incendiary." Her targeting computer painted the precise impact point as Sarah pulled the trigger. The aircraft shuddered as the 7-barrel rotary cannon spun up to firing speed, sending a controlled burst of 30 rounds through the school's windows. The enemy machine gun fell silent instantly. "Direct hit on target 1, Sarah reported, already banking toward the medical clinic, where a second machine gun continued firing. Rolling in on target 2. The second gun run was even more precise. Sarah placed her rounds through a narrow window opening, eliminating the threat while leaving the building's structure intact. The third position, a sniper in the mosque's minaret, required a climbing attack that brought her dangerously close to shoulder-fired missiles, but her rounds found their mark. "All hostile fire has ceased," she announced as the trapped soldiers began moving toward their extraction point. "Area secured for medical evacuation." The village fell silent except for the distant sound of approaching UH-60 Black Hawks coming to collect the wounded. Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio, filled with relief and gratitude. "Hammer 21, outstanding gun work. You saved our lives down here." But Sarah's radio remained ominously silent on the command frequency. She knew what Colonel Harrison was thinking. She had directly disobeyed orders, engaged civilian structures, and violated rules of engagement that existed for important political reasons. The fact that she had saved American lives while avoiding collateral damage wouldn't matter to the bureaucrats who measured success in diplomatic complaints rather than soldiers coming home alive. 3 weeks later, Sarah sat in the sterile courthouse at Peterson Space Force Base, facing a panel of 5 senior officers who looked at her as if she had personally dishonored the entire Air Force. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like mechanical insects, casting harsh shadows across the military tribunal that would decide her fate. Colonel Harrison sat at the prosecutor's table, shuffling through papers with the satisfied expression of a man about to prove a point he had been making for decades. Harrison had been fighting the integration of women into combat roles since Sarah had entered pilot training 4 years ago. As wing commander of the 442nd Fighter Wing, he wielded considerable influence over pilot assignments and career progression. He had watched Sarah excel in every training program, score the highest marks in weapons delivery, and demonstrate exceptional flying skills that surpassed most of her male counterparts. But none of that mattered now that he had the ammunition to destroy her career. "Captain Mitchell," Harrison began, standing with theatrical precision that suggested he had rehearsed this moment many times in his mind. "You are charged with willful disobedience of a lawful order, engaging in unauthorized combat operations, and conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. The gravity of these charges cannot be overstated. In a military organization, the chain of command is sacred. When pilots, especially female pilots in sensitive combat positions, decide they know better than their commanding officers, the entire structure of military discipline collapses." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The way he emphasized female pilots made Sarah's jaw clench involuntarily. This wasn't just about disobeying orders. This was about proving that women couldn't be trusted with the responsibility of combat aircraft, that they would make emotional decisions instead of following the careful protocols established by experienced male officers. Major David Chun, Sarah's appointed defense counsel, was a sharp young officer who had volunteered for this case, despite warnings that it could damage his own career prospects. Chun understood the broader implications of this trial. If Sarah was convicted, it would set a precedent that could be used to limit or eliminate women from combat aviation roles entirely. "How do you plead, Captain Mitchell?" the presiding judge asked. Sarah stood, her dress blue uniform immaculate despite the circumstances. Her wings gleamed silver against the dark fabric, a reminder of the years of training and dedication that had brought her to this moment. "Not guilty on all charges, Your Honor." Harrison smiled coldly as he approached the witness stand where he would present his case. "The facts are straightforward, gentlemen. Captain Mitchell received explicit orders to maintain a holding pattern and await ground reinforcements. Instead, she chose to conduct unauthorized attacks against civilian structures in a foreign nation, potentially creating an international incident and certainly violating the rules of engagement that protect both our forces and innocent civilians." "Objection," Major Chun interjected. "The defendant's actions resulted in no civilian casualties and successfully rescued American personnel under fire." "Overruled," the judge replied without looking up from his notes. The defendant's intentions, while possibly well-meaning, do not alter the fact that she violated direct orders and established protocols. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. Harrison called witness after witness who testified that Sarah had received clear, unambiguous orders to hold position and not engage. Communication specialists played the radio traffic, emphasizing the moment when Sarah had been explicitly ordered not to attack civilian structures. Military lawyers testified about the importance of rules of engagement in preventing international incidents. The defendant, Harrison continued, pacing in front of the panel like a professor delivering a lecture, put her personal judgment above the collective wisdom of her superiors. She decided that her assessment of the tactical situation was more important than the strategic considerations that guided her orders. This kind of cowboy mentality has no place in modern military aviation, where split-second decisions can have consequences far beyond the immediate battlefield. He paused to let his words sink in before delivering what he clearly considered his knockout punch. Gentlemen, if we allow pilots to ignore lawful orders whenever they feel emotional about a situation, we no longer have a military. We have a collection of individuals making independent decisions that could start wars, kill civilians, and undermine everything our military stands for. The defendant's actions, regardless of their immediate tactical success, represent a fundamental breakdown of military discipline that cannot be tolerated. When Major Chun called Sarah to testify in her own defense, the courtroom fell silent. She walked to the witness stand with the same confidence she had carried into every dangerous mission, her bearing reflecting 4 years of military discipline and professional excellence. Captain Mitchell, Chun began, please tell the court about your training and qualifications as an A-10 pilot. Sarah's voice was clear and professional as she recounted her achievements. I graduated first in my pilot training class at Vance Air Force Base. I completed A-10 conversion training with the highest scores in weapons delivery and close air support tactics. I've flown 47 combat missions in Syria with 0 civilian casualties and have been recommended for the Distinguished Flying Cross for previous actions supporting ground forces. And on the day in question, what did you observe through your targeting systems? I observed 12 American soldiers pinned down by enemy fire from 3 positions. Sergeant Torres was critically wounded and bleeding out. Lieutenant Rodriguez was attempting to provide medical aid while under continuous fire. Without immediate intervention, all 12 soldiers would have been killed or captured. Sarah's hands remained steady in her lap as she continued. I conducted detailed surveillance of all 3 enemy positions using advanced targeting pods. I confirmed no civilian presence in any of the structures. The enemy was using abandoned buildings as weapons platforms specifically because they knew our rules of engagement would prevent us from engaging them. What was your assessment of the tactical situation? The enemy had created a kill zone using civilian structures as shields. Ground reinforcements were 40 minutes away, and Sergeant Torres didn't have 40 minutes. I had the capability to eliminate the threats with precision fires that would neutralize the enemy while preserving the structures themselves. Major Chun nodded, then asked the crucial question. Captain Mitchell, why did you choose to disobey direct orders? Sarah looked directly at Colonel Harrison before answering. Because my oath as an Air Force officer is to support and defend the Constitution of the United States and to protect American lives. When I have the capability to save 12 American soldiers without causing collateral damage, that takes precedence over any other consideration. But what about military discipline? What about following orders? Military discipline exists to make us more effective at accomplishing our mission, not less effective. When orders prevent us from accomplishing the mission of protecting American lives, then those orders are counterproductive to our core purpose as military officers. Harrison's cross-examination was brutal. He attacked every aspect of Sarah's decision-making, questioning her judgment, her respect for authority, and her understanding of the broader strategic implications of her actions. "Captain Mitchell," Harrison said, circling her like a predator, "you've testified that you believed your tactical assessment was superior to the judgment of your commanding officers. Is that correct?" "I believe that I had information and capabilities that made immediate action necessary and feasible. Information and capabilities that your superiors, with access to intelligence reports, diplomatic communications, and strategic planning documents, somehow lacked?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "With respect, sir, I was the pilot in position to see the battlefield and make the shot. Sometimes the person closest to the action has the clearest picture of what needs to be done. And you felt qualified to make strategic decisions that could affect international relations, diplomatic negotiations, and coalition politics. I felt qualified to save American lives when I had the clear capability to do so without causing collateral damage." Harrison's voice rose as he delivered his final attack. "Captain, if every pilot decided when to follow orders and when to ignore them, based on their personal assessment of the situation, what would happen to military discipline?" Sarah paused, considering her answer carefully. "Sir, I believe that good officers use their training, judgment, and capabilities to accomplish the mission while following the spirit of their orders, even when the letter of those orders might prevent them from protecting American lives." "The spirit of orders?" Harrison's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Captain, orders are not suggestions open to interpretation. They are direct commands that must be followed without question. Your failure to understand this basic principle of military service makes you unfit to wear the uniform of the United States Air Force." The words hung in the courtroom like an indictment not just of Sarah's actions, but of her very right to serve her country. As she returned to her seat, Sarah caught sight of the gallery where Lieutenant Rodriguez sat with 3 other soldiers from the patrol she had saved. They weren't supposed to be there, weren't supposed to show support that could be seen as influencing the court, but they had come anyway. Rodriguez's eyes met hers with a gratitude that transcended military protocol. Behind him sat Sergeant Torres, alive and recovering because of the gun run Sarah had made in defiance of orders. Their presence should have felt like vindication, but as Sarah watched the panel's expressions, stone cold and disapproving, it felt more like a farewell. The verdict came after 2 hours of deliberation. "Guilty on all charges," the presiding judge announced. Sentence: reduction in rank to 2nd lieutenant, forfeiture of all pay and allowances for 6 months, and dismissal from the United States Air Force. Sarah's military career was over. 4 years of training, 47 successful combat missions, and a record of exceptional service meant nothing compared to the fact that she had pulled the trigger when a man told her not to. As the court dispersed and she gathered her belongings, Sarah realized that saving 12 American lives had been considered a lesser priority than maintaining absolute obedience to authority. Her apartment in Colorado Springs felt like a tomb. After the discharge, every item reflected her former life as an Air Force officer. Flight suits hanging in the closet, aviation books on the shelves, photographs from training and deployment that now seemed like artifacts from someone else's life. The certificate from pilot training, once her most prized possession, stared down at her from the wall like a monument to a dream that had died in a courtroom. The civilian job market proved as hostile as the military tribunal. Potential employers saw her discharge papers and their expressions changed from interest to suspicion. Airlines wanted pilots with clean records and corporate-friendly attitudes, not former military officers who had been court-martialed for disobeying orders. Defense contractors were even worse, viewing her as a liability who might bring unwanted attention to their operations. "Why were you discharged from the Air Force?" became the question that ended every interview before it truly began. Sarah tried various approaches to explaining the situation, but the story was too complex and controversial for most hiring managers. They heard disobeyed orders and court-martial and made their decisions accordingly. 3 months after her discharge, Sarah was working part-time at a sporting goods store, using her military experience to sell camping equipment to civilians, who thanked her for her service while offering her minimum wage and no benefits. Her savings were nearly exhausted, and the small apartment she could barely afford felt like a prison sentence after the freedom of flying combat aircraft. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who requested identification. Before handing over the expensive-looking envelope, the paper was heavy, cream-colored with a watermark Sarah couldn't identify. Her name was written in elegant script across the front: Captain Sarah Mitchell, not former captain or Ms. Mitchell, but her actual rank, as if the court-martial had never happened. Inside was a single sheet of matching paper and a business card. The letter was brief and intriguing. Captain Mitchell, your reputation for exceptional flying and principled decision-making has come to our attention. We represent clients who value results over bureaucracy, skill over politics. If you're interested in returning to the cockpit of high-performance aircraft, call the number below. Ask for Marcus Williams. Compensation begins at $300,000 annually. Apex Defense Solutions. Sarah read the letter 3 times before examining the business card. Apex Defense Solutions was embossed in silver lettering with a phone number that had too many digits for domestic use. She had heard whispers about companies like Apex during her Air Force service, private military contractors that operated in the gray areas between official government policy and practical necessity. They took contracts that regular military forces couldn't touch, operated in countries that didn't officially exist on operational maps, and paid their pilots enough to forget about the moral complexities of working outside traditional command structures. Sarah had always assumed such offers were urban legends, stories told by bitter former military personnel who couldn't adapt to civilian life. Now staring at the letter while calculating how many days she could afford rent and groceries, the offer seemed less like fantasy and more like salvation. $300,000 was more money than Sarah had ever imagined earning, enough to start completely over when the contract ended, enough to prove that her skills had value even if the Air Force had thrown her away. She picked up her phone and dialed the international number. The voice that answered was professionally neutral with a slight accent that suggested European education. Apex Defense Solutions, how may I direct your call? I'd like to speak with Marcus Williams, please. May I have your name? Sarah Mitchell. One moment, Captain Mitchell. The hold music was classical, something Sarah recognized from her childhood piano lessons, but couldn't name. Her father had insisted. She learned music along with flying, believing that both required precision, timing, and the ability to perform under pressure. The memory made her smile briefly before she remembered that her father had stopped taking her calls after the court-martial, unable to reconcile his pride in her service with his disappointment in her discharge. Captain Mitchell, the new voice, was male, American, with the confident tone of someone accustomed to command. This is Marcus Williams. Thank you for calling. I trust you received our correspondence? I did, though I have to ask how you knew where to find me. A soft chuckle. We make it our business to know where exceptional pilots end up, especially those who've been poorly treated by bureaucrats, more interested in politics than protecting American lives. The reference to her court-martial was direct enough to make Sarah's pulse quicken. You know about the incident in Syria? We know about the gun runs that saved 12 soldiers. We also know about the colonel who decided that following procedures was more important than bringing Americans home alive. That kind of bureaucratic thinking is exactly why our clients prefer to work with independent contractors rather than official military channels. Sarah felt a spark of the anger that had sustained her through the trial and its aftermath. What kind of work are we talking about? Close air support missions in contested airspace, precision strikes against high-value targets, and escort duties for personnel and equipment in hostile territory. The kind of flying you trained for, Captain, without the political constraints that prevent you from doing your job effectively. The offer was everything Sarah had lost when she was dismissed from the Air Force: the chance to fly combat aircraft, to use her skills in defense of friendly forces, to make a difference in conflicts that mattered. The only difference was that she would be working for private clients rather than the United States government. Where would these missions take place? Currently, our primary operations are in Eastern Europe. The Republic of Mulavia is experiencing what the State Department diplomatically calls civil unrest. Our client is an American energy company with substantial investments in the region. They need air support for security operations and personnel transport. Sarah walked to her window, looking out at the parking lot of her apartment complex, where her 10-year-old Honda sat next to dumpsters and broken streetlights. 6 months ago, she had been flying $30 million aircraft in defense of American interests. Now she was contemplating whether she could afford to buy groceries and pay rent in the same month. What's the contract duration? 6 months. Initially, with options for extension based on performance and operational requirements. Aircraft provided is an A-10C Thunderbolt II, fully modernized with the latest avionics and weapon systems. You'd be part of a small team providing comprehensive air support for ground operations. Sarah's heart jumped at the mention of the A-10. It was the aircraft she had trained on, the platform where she had developed her reputation as an exceptional pilot. The thought of returning to that cockpit, of feeling the massive cannons recoil as she provided close air support for friendly forces, was almost overwhelming. What are the risks? Williams paused before answering. Mulavia is complicated, Captain. The government controls the major cities, but much of the countryside is contested territory. There are 3 main factions fighting for control, and they all have access to modern anti-aircraft weapons. It's not Iraq or Afghanistan, where you had the full weight of the U.S. military providing support. This is more entrepreneurial. Sarah understood the euphemism. No rules of engagement written by Pentagon lawyers, no oversight from officers more concerned with political consequences than mission success, no court-martial for making the hard decisions that kept people alive. It was exactly what she had been looking for without realizing it. When would I need to give you an answer? We have a flight leaving tomorrow evening from Denver to Frankfurt, then on to Mulavia. We'd need a decision within the hour to process your paperwork and arrange transportation. The timeline was impossibly fast, but Sarah realized that was probably intentional. Apex wanted pilots who could make quick decisions under pressure, not people who needed weeks to analyze every option. The choice was simple: continue selling camping equipment to civilians while her flying skills atrophied, or return to the cockpit of a combat aircraft where her abilities could make a real difference. Send me the contract, she said. I'll review it and get back to you within the hour. Already done, Captain. Check your email. And Sarah welcome to Apex Defense Solutions. The line went dead, leaving Sarah staring at her phone and wondering if she had just made the best decision of her life, or committed herself to something far more dangerous than she understood. The contract, when it arrived in her email, was surprisingly straightforward: 6 months of close air support operations, in exchange for $300,000, with hazard pay bonuses and full medical coverage. At the bottom of the document, in elegant handwritten script, was a personal note. Some missions require pilots who understand that doing right matters more than following rules. We believe you're that kind of pilot. Victoria Cross, CEO, Apex Defense Solutions. Sarah stared at the signature for a long time, remembering the moment in her A-10 cockpit when she had chosen to save 12 American soldiers rather than follow orders that would have let them die. The Air Force had punished her for that choice, destroying her career in the name of military discipline. Now she had found people who valued the same qualities that had gotten her court-martialed. She signed the contract electronically and sent it back within 15 minutes. By tomorrow evening, she would be on her way to Mulavia, returning to the kind of flying that had defined her identity as a military officer. The apartment that had felt like a prison suddenly seemed like a brief stop between chapters of her life, a temporary setback before returning to her true calling. 24 hours later, Sarah was on a Lufthansa flight to Frankfurt, watching Colorado disappear beneath the clouds as she began the journey back to combat aviation. She had no idea that the 12 soldiers she had saved in Syria were about to return the favor in ways she couldn't imagine, or that her perfectly executed gun runs had been observed by people who understood exactly what kind of pilot she was. The war in Mulavia was about to get very interesting. The flight from Denver to Frankfurt gave Sarah 12 hours to study the intelligence briefing that Marcus Williams had uploaded to her secure tablet. The Republic of Mulavia was a landlocked nation roughly the size of West Virginia, squeezed between Romania and Ukraine like a forgotten remnant of Soviet collapse. What made it strategically important wasn't its size, but its location along critical energy pipelines that carried natural gas from Central Asia to Western Europe. 3 years earlier, President Viktor Petrov, a former Soviet military officer, had seized power in what he diplomatically termed a democratic transition, and everyone else recognized as a textbook coup. Petrov controlled the capital city of Vranica and the major pipeline terminals, but his authority ended at the city limits. The countryside belonged to a complex web of separatist movements, tribal militias, and criminal organizations that shifted allegiances based on whoever offered the best combination of money and weapons. Sarah's destination was the Severny Complex, a massive American-operated natural gas processing facility located 200 kilometers northeast of Vranica in territory that changed hands regularly depending on seasonal fighting patterns. Meridian Energy Corporation had invested over $2 billion in extraction and processing equipment, making it one of the largest American industrial investments in Eastern Europe. The problem was keeping it operational while various factions treated the surrounding area as their personal battlefield. According to the briefing, attacks on Meridian personnel and infrastructure had increased dramatically over the past 8 months. Pipeline bombings occurred weekly, equipment sabotage was a daily occurrence, and 6 American engineers had been killed in ambushes along the access roads. The Moldavian government couldn't provide adequate security beyond the major cities, and the various militia groups seemed more interested in extorting protection money than actually providing protection. Meridian's solution was Apex Defense Solutions. Instead of relying on local forces or overstretched government resources, they were bringing in private military contractors who could respond to threats without worrying about diplomatic protocols or rules of engagement designed for conventional warfare. Sarah's role would be providing close air support for ground operations, conducting reconnaissance flights over disputed territory, and serving as airborne command and control for complex missions. The aircraft she would be flying was described as a fully modernized A-10C Thunderbolt II, equipped with the latest targeting systems and defensive countermeasures. More importantly, it was configured for the kind of precision strikes that had made Sarah famous within Air Force circles before her court-martial. The massive 30mm GAU-8 cannon could engage individual targets at ranges exceeding 3 kilometers, allowing surgical strikes against hostile forces while minimizing collateral damage. Her fellow passenger, a German businessman heading to Romania for energy sector negotiations, glanced at her reading material with obvious concern. "Dangerous place, Mulavia," he said in accented English. "My company stopped operations there last year. Too much shooting, not enough stability." Sarah closed the briefing folder and smiled politely. "I'm used to working in complicated environments." "Perhaps, the man replied seriously. But Mulavia is different. The various groups there have been fighting each other for centuries. They see foreign companies as just another faction to exploit or eliminate. The smart money is leaving that region as quickly as possible. The conversation reminded Sarah of similar warnings she had received before deploying to Syria, Afghanistan, and other contested regions during her Air Force service. Every conflict zone had local experts who insisted that their particular war was uniquely dangerous and incomprehensible to outsiders. In Sarah's experience, the fundamentals remained consistent. Identify the power structures, understand the economic incentives, and demonstrate enough strength to discourage casual aggression while avoiding unnecessary escalation. The approach to Vranica International Airport revealed a landscape that reminded Sarah of the American Southwest. Rolling hills covered in sparse vegetation under an overcast sky that suggested either winter or perpetual gloom. The airport itself was modern and efficient, a reminder that energy money could buy impressive infrastructure even in remote corners of Europe. Sarah cleared customs without incident, her diplomatic passport, courtesy of Apex's connections, identifying her as a security consultant rather than a military contractor. Her contact was waiting in the arrivals area, impossible to miss despite the crowd. Victoria Cross stood nearly 6 feet tall with silver hair and the kind of confident posture that suggested decades of command experience. She wore civilian clothes, but Sarah could immediately identify her as former military by the way she scanned the terminal, noting exits and potential threats with the automatic awareness of someone who had operated in hostile environments. "Captain Mitchell," Cross said, extending her hand with a firm grip that conveyed respect rather than dominance. "Welcome to Mulavia. I'm Victoria Cross, and I'll be your immediate supervisor for this contract." They walked through the terminal, toward the parking area where an armored Mercedes waited with a driver who kept his hands visible and his eyes moving. Cross explained that she had spent 22 years in the Air Force before founding Apex Defense Solutions, retiring as a full colonel after commanding fighter wings in Iraq and Afghanistan. Her decision to enter the private sector had been motivated by frustration with bureaucratic constraints that prevented effective military operations. "The problem with military aviation today," Cross said as they drove through Vranica's outskirts, "is that we've created so many layers of approval and oversight that pilots can't respond effectively to tactical situations. By the time you get permission to engage a target, the target has moved, adapted, or killed the people you're trying to protect." Sarah nodded, recognizing the same frustrations that had led to her court-martial. "How do things work differently?" "At Apex, simple. We hire experienced pilots, give them clear mission objectives, and trust their professional judgment to accomplish those objectives using appropriate methods. If you see a threat to American personnel or critical infrastructure, you have the authority to eliminate that threat using whatever means are most effective." The philosophy was exactly what Sarah had been hoping to hear, but she had learned to be cautious about offers that seemed too good to be true. "What about oversight, chain of command, legal protection if things go wrong?" Cross smiled, apparently expecting the questions. "Your chain of command runs directly through me too. Our client, Meridian Energy. No military bureaucracy, no congressional oversight committees, no Pentagon lawyers second-guessing tactical decisions made by pilots with better situational awareness than anyone in Washington. As for legal protection, Apex maintains the best international law firm in Europe specifically to handle any complications that might arise from our operations." They passed through several checkpoints as they left the city, each manned by different uniformed groups that Cross identified as government forces, international peacekeepers, and private security companies. The variety of uniforms and weapons suggested a complex security environment where multiple organizations operated with overlapping and sometimes conflicting authorities. "The key to operating successfully in Mulavia," Cross explained, is understanding that traditional concepts of sovereignty and territorial control don't apply here. The government has legal authority, but limited practical power. The various militia groups have practical power, but no legal authority. International organizations have moral authority, but no enforcement capability. We have the capability to enforce our clients' interests, which makes us valuable to everyone and trusted by no one. The 70 complex appeared on the horizon like an industrial city rising from the steppes. Massive processing towers, storage tanks, and pipeline infrastructure stretched across several square kilometers, surrounded by security fencing and patrol roads. The facility was clearly designed to operate independently of local infrastructure, with its own power generation, water treatment, and communication systems. Sarah's quarters were located in a residential compound that resembled a small American suburb transplanted to Eastern Europe. Comfortable apartments, recreational facilities, and dining areas created a bubble of Western normalcy within the larger industrial complex. Her neighbors were a mix of American engineers, European technicians, and international security personnel, all working under contracts that paid premium salaries in exchange for accepting the risks of operating in contested territory. The aircraft hangar was Sarah's first destination after settling into her apartment. The A-10C Thunderbolt II waiting for her was exactly as advertised, a fully modernized version of the aircraft she had flown in Syria. The familiar lines of the twin-engine attack aircraft brought back memories of countless training flights and combat missions. This particular aircraft had been upgraded with advanced targeting pods, improved defensive systems, and communications equipment that would allow coordination with ground forces and other aircraft. "She's all yours," said Captain Lisa Park, the Apex pilot Sarah was replacing. Park was completing her contract and rotating back to the United States, but she spent 2 hours briefing Sarah on local conditions, threat patterns, and the specific challenges of operating in Moldavian airspace. "The biggest difference from military operations," Park explained, "is that you're not fighting a conventional enemy with predictable tactics and equipment. The various groups here use everything from Soviet-era equipment to modern Western weapons, depending on what they can buy, steal, or capture. Last month, one engaged targets using French missiles, Russian mortar, and American small arms, all operated by the same militia group." Park's experience log showed the kind of varied missions Sarah could expect: reconnaissance flights over disputed territory, close air support for ground convoys, precision strikes against infrastructure targets, and what were diplomatically termed deterrent patrols, designed to discourage hostile activity through visible presence rather than actual engagement. "The rules of engagement are refreshingly simple," Park continued. "Protect American personnel and Meridian infrastructure using whatever level of force is appropriate for the threat. If someone shoots at you, shoot back. If someone threatens the facility, eliminate the threat. If you're not sure whether something constitutes a threat, err on the side of protecting our people." The simplicity was appealing after the complex and often contradictory rules that had governed Sarah's Air Force missions. No requirement to request permission before engaging hostile forces. No need to justify target selection to distant commanders who lacked situational awareness. No political considerations that prioritize diplomatic convenience over mission effectiveness. Sarah's first operational flight was scheduled for the following morning, a reconnaissance mission over the northern territories where increased militia activity had been reported. She spent the evening studying terrain maps, weather forecasts, and intelligence reports that painted a picture of a region in constant low-level conflict. Various groups controlled different areas depending on seasonal patterns, economic opportunities, and the ever-shifting balance of power between local leaders. The morning briefing was conducted by Marcus Williams, who had flown in from Apex's European headquarters to personally oversee Sarah's integration into operations. Williams was younger than Sarah had expected, probably early 40s, with the kind of relaxed confidence that suggested extensive experience in complicated situations. "Your primary mission today is intelligence gathering," Williams explained, pointing to areas marked on a large tactical map. "We need current information on militia positions, equipment, and activity patterns in the northern valleys. Secondary mission is to establish your presence in the area. Let the various groups know that Meridian has air support available if needed." The mission briefing covered potential threats, escape routes, communication protocols, and coordination with other Apex personnel operating in the region. Sarah noted that the level of detail and preparation was equivalent to or better than what she had experienced in the Air Force, but without the layers of approval and oversight that often delayed or complicated military operations. "Questions?" Williams asked as the briefing concluded. Sarah had several, but they were operational rather than philosophical. Flight times, fuel considerations, weapons loadout, and communication frequencies were quickly resolved. The underlying question about the moral and legal implications of private, military operations remained unasked but clearly understood by everyone in the room. Her A-10 was pre-flighted and ready when Sarah arrived at the hangar. The ground crew was experienced and professional, mostly former military personnel who understood the aircraft systems and requirements. The familiarity of the pre-flight routine brought back memories of countless similar mornings in Syria, the combination of anticipation and focus that preceded every combat mission. Takeoff from Severny's private airfield was smooth and unremarkable. But as Sarah climbed the cruising altitude, she realized she was crossing into a fundamentally different kind of warfare. No air traffic control guidance, no designated military airspace, no clear distinction between friendly and hostile territory. She was flying over a patchwork of competing authorities where the rules changed, depending on who controlled which valley or mountain pass. The northern territories revealed themselves as a landscape of small villages, agricultural areas, and defensive positions that suggested ongoing military activity. Through her targeting pod, Sarah could see evidence of recent fighting. Burned buildings, abandoned vehicles, and what appeared to be prepared defensive positions overlooking key roads and intersections. Her radio crackled with a transmission from Apex ground personnel operating in the area. "Warhorse, this is Groundhog 6. We have eyes on your position and are monitoring local communications. Advise that militia activity in your area has increased significantly over the past 48 hours. Sarah acknowledged the transmission while conducting systematic surveillance of the assigned sectors. Her targeting systems recorded vehicle movements, personnel concentrations, and potential weapon positions for later analysis. The technology was impressive, allowing detailed observation from altitudes that kept her aircraft beyond the range of most ground-based threats. "Warhorse Groundhog 6, came another transmission. "We're picking up radio chatter about an American aircraft in the area. Recommend you vary your patrol pattern and maintain situational awareness." The warning was timely. Through her defensive systems, Sarah detected the distinctive signature of a surface-to-air missile system attempting to lock onto her aircraft. The threat was still at extreme range, but it confirmed that someone in the area possessed sophisticated anti-aircraft weapons and was prepared to use them against unidentified aircraft. Sarah immediately implemented evasive maneuvers, dropping chaff and flares while changing altitude and direction to break any potential missile lock. Her training kicked in automatically, the same threat reaction procedure she had practiced countless times during Air Force service. The threat indication faded as she moved beyond the missile system's effective range, but the message was clear. The airspace over northern Moldavia was contested, and various groups possessed the capability to engage modern military aircraft. "Groundhog 6 Warhorse," Sarah transmitted. I'm being painted by SAM radar, probably S-15 or similar system. Threat is currently beyond engagement range, but recommend we treat this area as hostile airspace going forward. Copy that, Warhorse. Intel suggests several militia groups have acquired modern air defense systems through black market purchases. Your presence may have triggered a response from groups that view American aircraft as legitimate targets. The intelligence was disturbing, but not entirely surprising. In the post-Cold War environment, advanced military equipment had become available to anyone with sufficient money and connections. Militia groups that had once been limited to small arms and improvised weapons now possessed capabilities that had previously been restricted to national militaries. Sarah completed her reconnaissance mission without further incident, but her aircraft's defensive systems recorded multiple attempts at radar lock-on from different locations. Someone was clearly tracking her movements and attempting to establish targeting solutions, suggesting a level of coordination and sophistication that went beyond random militia activity. The post-flight debriefing revealed the complexity of the situation Sarah had entered. Intelligence analysts had identified at least 6 different groups operating in the Northern Territories, each with different political objectives, equipment, capabilities, and attitudes toward foreign presence in the region. Some were genuinely interested in territorial control and political power. Others were essentially criminal organizations using political rhetoric to justify extortion and smuggling operations. The challenge, Williams explained, is that these groups often cooperate when it serves their interests, particularly when facing outside threats. Your reconnaissance flight may have been seen as a precursor to offensive operations, which could motivate traditionally hostile groups to coordinate their response. Cross nodded in agreement. We need to be prepared for the possibility that Meridian's decision to bring in air support could escalate rather than de-escalate the regional situation. Groups that had been content to conduct low-level harassment may decide that more aggressive action is necessary to drive out foreign influence. The implications were clear. Sarah's presence in Mulavia represented a significant escalation in the ongoing conflict over control of energy resources and transportation routes. Local groups that had previously limited themselves to pipeline sabotage and occasional kidnappings might now feel compelled to acquire and deploy more sophisticated weapons systems. That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment reviewing the day's intelligence reports and trying to understand the deeper currents of the conflict she had been hired to participate in. The official narrative was straightforward. American Energy Company requires security support to protect legitimate business operations from criminal interference. The reality was more complex, involving competing national interests, ethnic tensions, and economic desperation that made simple solutions impossible. Her secure communication system chimed with an encrypted message from an address she didn't recognize. The contents were brief and disturbing. Captain Mitchell, you may not remember me, but I was part of the patrol you saved in Syria. We've been following your situation, and we think you should know that some people are very interested in your current assignment. Watch your back. A friend. Sarah stared at the message for several minutes, trying to identify which of the 12 soldiers she had saved might have sent it and what kind of interest they were referring to. The fact that someone was monitoring her activities closely enough to know about her Apex contract was unsettling, particularly given the sensitive nature of private military operations. She forwarded the message to Victoria Cross through Apex's secure communication system, along with a request for additional background checks on her current assignment. If people were taking unusual interest in her presence in Mulavia, she needed to understand why and what kind of complications might result. Cross's response came within an hour. Message received and under investigation. Recommend heightened security awareness until we can determine source and intent. Your Syrian operation generated more attention than we initially realized. and some parties may see your current assignment as an opportunity to settle old scores or advance political agendas. The warning was cryptic but ominous. Sarah had assumed that her court-martial and discharge from the Air Force had closed the book on her Syrian operations, but apparently the reverberations were still being felt by people with long memories and unclear motivations. Part 3. The Defining Decision. Sarah's second week in Mulavia began with an emergency briefing at 05:00 hours. Marcus Williams looked as if he hadn't slept, and the intelligence reports spread across the conference table suggested the reason. Why? Overnight surveillance had detected significant movement in the northern territories, with multiple militia groups apparently coordinating activities for the first time in months. Satellite imagery shows convoy movements from 3 different directions, all converging on the Krasny Ridge area about 40 kilometers north of our position, Williams explained, pointing to areas marked in red on the tactical display. Communications. Intercepts suggest they're planning a coordinated attack on our northern pipeline stations, possibly as early as tonight. The implications were serious. The northern pipeline complex represented a critical choke point in the natural gas transportation system, and successful sabotage could shut down operations for weeks while repairs were completed. More importantly, the facility was staffed by 18 American engineers and technicians who would be trapped if militia forces seized control of the area. Victoria Cross joined the briefing via secure video link from Apex headquarters, her expression grim as she reviewed the intelligence reports. Local government forces are 40 kilometers away and can't respond in time to prevent an attack. Meridian's ground security team consists of 12 contractors who are equipped for perimeter defense, not offensive operations against a coordinated assault. Sarah studied the terrain maps, noting the elevated positions that would provide natural defensive advantages for attacking forces. The pipeline complex was located in a valley with limited escape routes, making it extremely vulnerable to the kind of siege tactics that militia groups had perfected over years of irregular warfare. "What's my mission?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Williams pulled up aerial photographs of the Krasny Ridge area, showing the rocky terrain where militia forces were apparently concentrating. "We need you to conduct reconnaissance of the assembly areas and, if you confirm the presence of significant hostile forces, engage them before they can move against our facilities." The mission parameters were clear but problematic. Sarah would be conducting preemptive strikes against forces that hadn't yet attacked American personnel or infrastructure, based on intelligence that suggested their intentions rather than proving their actions. In military terminology, it was a preemptive engagement based on imminent threat assessment rather than immediate self-defense. "Rules of engagement?" Sarah asked. Cross answered from the video screen. "If you confirm the presence of organized hostile forces with the apparent capability and intent to attack American personnel, you are authorized to engage using appropriate force levels. Priority is protection of American lives and critical infrastructure." The authorization was broader than anything Sarah had received during her Air Force service, but it also placed the entire burden of tactical decision-making on her judgment. No distant commanders to request permission from, no lawyers to review target selections, no political considerations to complicate purely military decisions. Sarah's A-10 was armed with a full load of 30mm ammunition, Maverick air-to-surface missiles, and 500-pound precision-guided bombs. The weapons selection reflected the expectation that she might encounter armored vehicles, fortified positions, and personnel concentrations that would require different engagement techniques. The flight to the Krasny Ridge area took 25 minutes through airspace that felt increasingly hostile as Sarah approached the suspected assembly areas. Her defensive systems detected multiple attempts at radar lock-on, suggesting that various groups possessed surface-to-air missiles and were prepared to use them against unidentified aircraft. Groundhog 6 Warhorse. Sarah transmitted to the Apex ground team, monitoring communications in the area. I'm approaching the target zone and showing multiple SAM threats. Recommend you monitor for any indications of coordinated air defense. Activities. Copy, Warhorse. We're detecting increased radio traffic in multiple languages, probably coordination between different groups. Suggest extreme caution in the target area. Sarah's targeting pod revealed exactly what the intelligence reports had predicted. 3 separate convoy positions contained approximately 60 vehicles and what appeared to be several hundred personnel. More concerning were the heavy weapons visible through her optics: mortar, rocket-propelled grenades, and at least 2 pieces of artillery that could engage the pipeline complex from concealed positions in the ridgeline. The tactical situation was clear. Organized hostile forces with the capability to attack American personnel were positioning themselves for what appeared to be a coordinated assault. The weapons and equipment visible through Sarah's targeting systems were far beyond what would be needed for defensive operations or routine patrol activities. Groundhog 6 Warhorse, Sarah reported. I have eyes on approximately 60 vehicles and 200 to 300 personnel in 3 separate positions. Confirmed heavy weapons including mortar and artillery pieces. Assessment is that this represents an organized assault force with intent to engage our northern facilities. Copy your assessment, Warhorse. Can you identify specific targets for engagement? Sarah methodically cataloged the priority targets. Command vehicles identifiable by their communications equipment. Heavy weapons systems that pose the greatest threat to the pipeline complex, and fuel trucks that would be necessary for sustained operations. The targeting solutions were clear, and her weapons systems were more than adequate for engaging all identified threats. But something bothered her about the tactical picture. The militia forces were positioned in a way that suggested coordination and planning, but they were also remarkably exposed to air attack. Experienced irregular forces would normally take greater care to conceal their positions from aerial observation, particularly when operating in areas where air support might be available to their opponents. Groundhog 6, does this tactical setup seem unusual to you? These forces are positioned as if they don't expect air attacks. A pause before the response. Warhorse, intel suggests these groups may not be aware of your presence in the region. They've been planning this operation for weeks, probably before Meridian brought in air support. The explanation was plausible, but Sarah's instinct suggested something more complex was occurring. The militia forces were too well organized and equipped for random criminal groups, and their positioning suggested professional military planning rather than amateur enthusiasm. Her radio crackled with a new transmission, this time from Victoria Cross. Warhorse, this is Apex Command. Intel reports indicate the attack on our facilities is scheduled for tonight. You are cleared to engage all identified targets at your discretion. Repeat, you are cleared to engage. Sarah lined up her first target, a command vehicle surrounded by communications equipment and personnel who appeared to be coordinating activities between the different groups. The Maverick missile's targeting system locked onto the vehicle's heat signature, and Sarah's finger found the trigger that would initiate her first preemptive strike as a private military contractor. The decision felt different from her combat missions in Syria. Those had been defensive engagements against forces that were actively attacking American personnel. This was preemptive action based on intelligence assessment and threat analysis rather than immediate response to hostile fire. But the lives of 18 American engineers depended on preventing this attack from reaching the pipeline complex. Sarah's job was protecting those lives using whatever methods were most effective, and diplomatic niceties about preemptive engagement seemed less important than ensuring her countrymen went home safely. She fired the first Maverick missile, watching it streak toward the command vehicle with deadly precision. The explosion eliminated the target and created immediate chaos in the surrounding positions, as militia personnel scrambled to understand What was happening? Sarah immediately engaged her second target, an artillery piece that could have bombarded the pipeline complex from concealed positions. The 30mm cannon was devastatingly effective against the thin-skinned vehicle, destroying the weapon and its crew in a sustained burst of high-explosive rounds. Direct hits on priority targets, Sarah reported calmly. Engaging remaining heavy weapons. The militia forces were responding with increasing panic as Sarah systematically destroyed their heavy equipment and command capabilities. Some vehicles attempted to disperse and escape, but they were operating in open terrain where her targeting systems could track them easily. Within 10 minutes, Sarah had eliminated 12 vehicles, 3 artillery pieces, and approximately 40 personnel. The organized assault force had been reduced to scattered groups fleeing in different directions, no longer capable of conducting coordinated operations against fixed targets. All primary targets eliminated, Sarah reported. Hostile forces are dispersing and no longer represent an organized threat to our facilities. Outstanding work, Warhorse, came Cross's voice over the radio. You've prevented what could have been a catastrophic attack on American personnel and critical infrastructure. As Sarah flew back toward the Severny complex, she felt the familiar mixture of satisfaction and unease that followed successful combat missions. She had accomplished her objective with textbook precision, protecting American lives and interests using superior firepower and tactical advantage. But she had also conducted preemptive strikes against forces that hadn't yet committed hostile acts, based on intelligence assessments that could have been wrong. The militia personnel she had killed might have been planning attacks, or they might have been engaged in routine military exercises or defensive preparations. The moral complexity of private military operations was becoming clearer. Without the oversight and constraints of official military channels, contractors had greater freedom to act decisively in ambiguous situations. That freedom allowed more effective protection of American interests, but it also placed enormous responsibility on individual operators to make life and death decisions without institutional guidance. Sarah's post-flight debriefing confirmed the success of her mission. Intelligence reports indicated that the planned attack had been abandoned, with surviving militia forces withdrawing to defensive positions rather than attempting to continue their offensive operations. The 18 American engineers at the Northern Pipeline Complex would continue their work without facing the siege that had seemed inevitable just hours earlier. Your actions today probably saved dozens of American lives, Williams told her during the debrief. The militia forces were well equipped and organized enough to overrun our ground security team and take hostages. That kind of incident would have created an international crisis and forced Meridian to suspend operations indefinitely. The praise was gratifying, but Sarah found herself thinking about the tactical situation she had encountered. The militia forces had been too well organized and equipped for random criminal groups, yet too exposed for experienced military units. Someone with professional knowledge had planned their positioning, but that same professional knowledge should have anticipated the possibility of air attack. Do we have any intelligence on how these groups acquired their equipment? Sarah asked. Some of those weapon systems were fairly sophisticated for militia forces operating in remote territory. Cross, still participating via video link, frowned at the question. That's an interesting point. Our initial assessment was that the various groups had pooled their resources for this operation, but you're right that their equipment levels were unusually high. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from the Northern Pipeline Complex. Apex Command, this is Northern Station. We're receiving radio transmissions from unknown sources claiming that American forces have conducted unprovoked attacks against civilian targets. They're demanding immediate withdrawal of all foreign personnel from the region. Sarah felt a chill of recognition. In Iraq and Afghanistan, successful military operations were often followed by propaganda campaigns designed to reframe Tactical defeats as evidence of American aggression against civilian populations. The same pattern was apparently emerging in Mulavia. Any indication of media or international attention to today's operations? Cross asked. Negative so far, but that could change quickly if these groups have connections to international news organizations or human rights groups. The potential for escalation was obvious. What had been a successful preemptive strike could be portrayed as an unprovoked attack by American military contractors against indigenous groups defending their territory. The lack of official government oversight that made Apex operations more tactically effective also made them more vulnerable to political criticism. Sarah's secure communication system chimed with another encrypted message from her anonymous contact. Captain Mitchell, your operation today was observed by parties with significant interest in your activities. Recommend extreme caution in future operations. Someone is using your presence in Mulavia for purposes that may not align with your mission parameters. The warning was vague but ominous. Sarah forwarded it to Cross with a request for additional security analysis and background investigation. If her operations were being monitored by unknown parties with unclear objectives, she needed to understand the broader context of her mission. Cross's response came within minutes. Message received and concerning. Intelligence analysis suggests your presence in Mulavia may be serving multiple purposes beyond the stated mission parameters. Recommend we schedule a detailed briefing to discuss potential complications. The euphemistic language couldn't disguise the implication that Sarah might be involved in something more complex than private security operations. The possibility that her mission served hidden agendas or undisclosed objectives was disturbing, particularly given her recent experience with institutional betrayal and political manipulation. That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment reviewing intelligence reports and trying to understand the deeper patterns of the conflict she had been hired to participate in. The militia group she had engaged possessed equipment and coordination capabilities that suggested external support, but their tactical deployment had been almost suicidally exposed to air attack. Someone with professional military knowledge had positioned those forces in a way that virtually guaranteed their destruction once air support became available. The question was whether that positioning reflected incompetence, overconfidence, or something more deliberate. Her secure phone rang with a call from an encrypted number she didn't recognize. The voice was American, male, and familiar in a way that made her pulse quicken. Captain Mitchell, this is Lieutenant Rodriguez from Syria. I hope you remember me. Sarah certainly remembered Jake Rodriguez, the young officer whose patrol she had saved with precision gun runs that had ultimately cost her military career. His voice brought back memories of desperate radio transmissions and the split-second decision to disobey orders in favor of protecting American lives. Jake, of course I remember you. How did you get this number? That's complicated, but I'm calling because you're in danger. The operation you conducted today was observed by people who have been tracking your activities since Syria. Someone is using you, Captain, and when they're done, you're going to be expendable. The warning was direct and terrifying. Rodriguez continued before Sarah could respond. I can't explain everything over the phone, but you need to know that your court-martial wasn't random bureaucratic punishment. It was orchestrated by people who needed you dismissed from the military so you could be recruited for private operations. Without official oversight. Sarah felt the ground shifting beneath her feet as Rodriguez's words reframed everything she thought she understood about her recent experiences. Her court-martial, her discharge, her recruitment by Apex Defense Solutions, and her current mission in Mulavia were apparently connected parts of a larger plan that she had been unwittingly participating in. Who's behind this? She asked. People with resources, connections, and objectives that go beyond private security contracts. Captain, you need to be very careful about your next operations. Someone is positioning you for something that's going to have consequences far beyond protecting oil facilities in Eastern Europe. The line went dead, leaving Sarah staring at her phone and wondering how many of her recent decisions had actually been her own. The possibility that her entire post-military career had been orchestrated by unknown parties with hidden agendas was almost too disturbing to contemplate. But Rodriguez's warning explained several things that had been bothering her about her current situation: the unusually generous contract terms, the sophisticated equipment and intelligence support, and the broad operational authority she had been granted all suggested that Apex valued her services for reasons that went beyond simple piloting skills. Someone needed a pilot with her specific combination of abilities, experience, and willingness to operate outside official channels. More importantly, they needed a pilot whose dismissal from the military made her available for operations that official forces couldn't conduct. Sarah was beginning to understand that her perfect gun runs in Syria had made her famous in circles far beyond the Air Force, and that fame had made her valuable to people with objectives she was only beginning to comprehend. The question was whether she was strong enough to discover their true intentions before those intentions got her killed. Part 4. Immediate consequences surface. The retaliation came faster than anyone at Apex had anticipated. Sarah was conducting her morning aircraft inspection when the first explosion rocked the Severny complex, followed immediately by the distinctive whine of incoming mortar rounds. The attack was coordinated and sustained, targeting critical infrastructure with the kind of precision that suggested detailed intelligence about the facility's vulnerabilities. "All personnel to hardened positions," Victoria Cross's voice crackled over the facility's public address system. "We are under coordinated assault. This is not a drill." Sarah sprinted toward the aircraft hangar, knowing that her A-10 represented both the facility's most valuable asset and its most effective defense against organized ground assault. But as she reached the hangar doors, a series of explosions erupted across the airfield, sending chunks of concrete and twisted metal flying in all directions. The attackers had anticipated her response. Instead of the random harassment that characterized most militia operations, this was a carefully planned assault designed to neutralize the facility's air support capability, while ground forces moved into position for the main attack. "Warhorse, this is ground control," came Marcus Williams's voice over her radio. "Runway is damaged but potentially usable. Can you get airborne?" Sarah surveyed the airfield through the smoke and debris. Several craters had been blown in the main runway, but the damage appeared concentrated in specific areas rather than randomly distributed. Someone with engineering knowledge had calculated exactly where to place charges for maximum disruption while still leaving the runway potentially operational. "Affirmative, ground control. I can work around the damage, but I'll need runway repair teams standing by in case I can't stop before the damaged sections." "Copy that." "Repair teams are already moving. Priority is getting you airborne to provide close air support for perimeter defense." Sarah's pre-flight checklist was abbreviated by necessity, focusing on critical systems rather than comprehensive inspection. Her aircraft appeared undamaged, but the sustained mortar bombardment meant that additional attacks could occur at any moment. Every minute on the ground increased the risk that her A-10 would be destroyed before she could bring its firepower to bear against the attacking forces. The takeoff roll was harrowing, requiring precise navigation around crater damage while accelerating to flying speed under intermittent mortar fire. Sarah's aircraft cleared the runway with less than 50 meters to spare, climbing rapidly to escape the range of ground-based weapons. From altitude, the tactical situation was clear and disturbing. The Severny complex was under assault from multiple directions by forces that were using sophisticated tactics and equipment. This wasn't random militia harassment, but a coordinated military operation designed to capture or destroy the entire facility. "Ground control, Warhorse," Sarah transmitted. I have visual on approximately 40 vehicles and 200 personnel conducting organized assault operations. Equipment includes armored personnel carriers, mobile artillery, and what appears to be command and control vehicles. The attacking forces were using terrain features and industrial structures to approach the facility's perimeter, while maintaining concealment from ground-based observation. From altitude, the tactical situation revealed itself as something far more sophisticated than militia harassment. Sarah could see the attacking forces using textbook combined arms tactics, with armored vehicles providing covering fire, while infantry advanced through predetermined routes that avoided the facility's defensive strong points. This was military-grade planning executed by professional soldiers, not the random violence that characterized most regional conflicts. Her targeting pod identified priority threats as they maneuvered through the industrial complex surrounding the Severny facility. 2 BTR-80 armored personnel carriers were advancing along the eastern approach road, their 14.5 mm machine guns suppressing the defenders' positions, while dismounted infantry moved through the pipeline infrastructure. More concerning were the mobile artillery pieces that had established firing positions on elevated ground, approximately 2 kilometers from the main complex. Ground control. I'm observing coordinated assault by professional military forces, Sarah reported while lining up her first target. Equipment and tactics suggest regular army rather than militia operations. Recommend we consider this a full-scale military engagement. Williams's response came through bursts of static as communications equipment struggled with electromagnetic interference from jamming systems the attackers had deployed. Copy that assessment, Warhorse. Engage all hostile forces with extreme prejudice. Our perimeter is holding but taking casualties. Sarah rolled into her first attack run, targeting the mobile artillery that posed the greatest threat to the facility's defenders. The 30 mm GAU-8 cannon was devastating against thin-skinned vehicles, and her first burst destroyed an 82 mm mortar position along with its crew. The distinctive sound of the cannon's firing echoed across the battlefield like thunder, announcing that the defenders now had serious air support available. The attacking forces reacted immediately to her presence, with multiple anti-aircraft weapons opening fire from concealed positions throughout the area. Sarah found herself flying through a maze of tracer fire and surface-to-air missiles, using the A-10's legendary survivability to continue her attacks, while avoiding defensive systems that would have forced other aircraft to withdraw. Her second attack run eliminated one of the BTR-80 armored vehicles, but not before it had deposited a squad of infantry near the facility's eastern gate. Through her targeting optics, Sarah could see the soldiers moving with practiced efficiency toward breach points in the perimeter fence. These weren't desperate militia fighters but trained professionals executing a carefully rehearsed assault. Plan. Ground control. Hostile forces have penetrated the eastern perimeter, Sarah reported while engaging the command vehicle that appeared to be coordinating the assault. I count approximately 20 personnel inside your defensive line. Copy, Warhorse. Our security teams are responding, but we need you to focus on preventing additional breaches. Sarah shifted her attention to the western approach where a second wave of vehicles was advancing toward the facility. Her Maverick missiles were particularly effective against the heavier armored vehicles that led this assault, but each successful engagement revealed more sophisticated defensive capabilities. Among the attacking forces, someone had equipped these soldiers with modern anti-aircraft missiles, advanced communications gear, and tactical knowledge that suggested professional military training. More disturbing was their apparent knowledge of the facility's layout and defensive capabilities, indicating access to intelligence that should have been restricted to Meridian personnel and their security contractors. The battle continued for 2 hours, with Sarah conducting continuous attack runs while the facility's ground defenders fought off repeated attempts to breach the perimeter. Her aircraft absorbed multiple hits from small arms fire and shrapnel from surface-to-air missiles, but the A-10's armored cockpit and redundant systems allowed her to maintain operations despite accumulating damage. Finally, the attacking forces began withdrawing in the same organized manner they had used for their assault. Sarah pursued the retreating vehicles, inflicting additional casualties while they attempted to escape, but their withdrawal routes had been planned as carefully as their initial approach. Within 30 minutes, the battlefield was quiet except for the smoke rising from destroyed vehicles and damaged infrastructure. "Ground control, hostile forces are withdrawing to the north and west," Sarah reported as she circled the facility. "To assess damage. I'm showing significant battle damage to my aircraft and need to return for inspection and repair." Her landing was complicated by hydraulic damage that affected her flight controls, but Sarah managed to bring the A-10 down safely on the cratered runway. Ground crews immediately swarmed her aircraft, documenting the extensive damage while armored. Vehicles secured the airfield perimeter against possible follow-up attacks. The post-battle assessment revealed the sophistication of the assault they had just repelled. The attacking forces had used electronic warfare systems to disrupt communications, deployed modern anti-aircraft weapons that could engage military aircraft, and demonstrated tactical knowledge that suggested months of preparation and intelligence gathering. "This wasn't random militia activity," Williams explained during the emergency briefing that followed the attack. "Someone provided these forces with detailed intelligence about our capabilities, equipment, and defensive procedures. They knew exactly where to attack for maximum effect." Victoria Cross participated via secure video link, her expression grim, as she reviewed battle damage reports and casualty assessments. 3 Meridian employees had been wounded during the assault, and several critical systems had been damaged by mortar fire. More importantly, the attackers had demonstrated capabilities that threatened the entire concept of using private military contractors to provide security in contested regions. "The question we need to answer," Cross said, "is how a collection of regional militia groups suddenly acquired the equipment, training, and intelligence necessary to conduct coordinated military operations against a hardened facility defended by professional contractors." Sarah had been thinking about the same question throughout the battle. The attacking forces had moved and fought like regular military units, but their equipment bore no national markings, and their tactics seemed designed to obscure their actual identities. Someone was providing sophisticated military capabilities to groups that should have been limited to small arms and improvised explosives. "Could this be proxy warfare?" Sarah asked. "Someone using local groups as surrogates for operations they can't conduct openly?" Williams nodded grimly. "That's our working hypothesis. The equipment we observed today would cost millions of dollars and require extensive training to operate effectively. Regional militia groups don't have those resources, but several national governments do." The implications were disturbing. If Sarah was participating in an undeclared conflict between national powers, rather than providing security for a private energy company, the stakes were far higher than anyone had acknowledged. Proxy warfare meant that escalation could continue indefinitely, with each side providing increasingly sophisticated capabilities to their local surrogates. Cross's expression suggested she was thinking along similar lines. "Sarah, I need to ask whether you're comfortable continuing operations, given the level of opposition we're now facing. Today's attack represents a significant escalation in the threat environment." The question forced Sarah to confront the reality of her situation. She had signed a contract to provide close air support for security operations, but she was now participating in what appeared to be conventional warfare between unidentified national powers. The sophistication of the opposition meant that future engagements would be increasingly dangerous, with no guarantee that her aircraft's legendary survivability would be sufficient against modern military systems. But Sarah also remembered the 18 American engineers at the Northern Pipeline Complex, the Meridian personnel who depended on her for protection, and the 3 wounded contractors who had been lucky to survive today's assault. Walking away from her contract would mean abandoning people who had no other source of air support in an increasingly hostile environment. "I'm staying," she said finally. "These people are counting on me, and I won't abandon them because the opposition is getting more sophisticated." Cross smiled for the first time since the battle had ended. "I hoped you'd say that, because we're going to need exceptional pilots for what comes next." The cryptic comment suggested that Apex was planning operations beyond simple defensive measures. Sarah's successful performance during the assault had apparently impressed people with the authority to authorize more aggressive actions, but the nature of those actions remained unclear. Her secure communication system chimed with another encrypted message from Lieutenant Rodriguez. "Captain, today's attack was designed to test your capabilities and reactions under pressure. Someone wanted to see how you perform in complex tactical situations. The fact that you're still alive and operational means you've passed whatever evaluation they were conducting." The message was followed by a detailed intelligence report that Sarah forwarded immediately to Cross and Williams. Rodriguez's sources had identified the attacking forces as a composite unit drawn from several different military organizations, equipped with weapons and vehicles provided through arms dealers with connections to major powers. More disturbing was Rodriguez's assessment that the attack had been allowed to proceed, despite advanced intelligence that could have prevented it. Someone with access to high-level intelligence had chosen not to warn Apex about the impending assault, suggesting that the battle served purposes beyond simple military objectives. "Captain," Rodriguez's final message read, "you're being positioned for something that requires a pilot with your specific combination of skills, experience, and willingness to operate without official oversight. The people orchestrating this have invested considerable resources in creating the circumstances that brought you to Mulavia. Don't assume that anything about your situation is coincidental." The warning forced Sarah to reconsider everything she thought she understood about her current assignment, her recruitment by Apex, her assignment to Mulavia, and even today's battle might be components of a larger plan that she was unwittingly helping to execute. That evening, as maintenance crews worked to repair her battle-damaged A-10, Sarah sat in her apartment trying to piece together the pattern of events that had brought her to this point. Her court-martial in Syria had destroyed her military career, but made her available for private contracting. Her exceptional performance as a combat pilot had attracted attention from people with resources and objectives that extended beyond simple security operations. Someone had invested considerable effort in positioning her exactly where she was, with specific capabilities and authorities that allowed her to conduct operations that official military forces couldn't perform. Question was whether she was serving American interests, foreign interests, or private interests that might not align with either. Her secure phone rang with a call from Marcus Williams. "Sarah, we need to discuss your next assignment. Can you come to the operations center?" The briefing room was more crowded than usual, with several people Sarah didn't recognize participating via secure video links. Williams introduced them as Apex senior management and client representatives, but their backgrounds and authorities remained deliberately vague. "Captain Mitchell," began a woman identified only as Control 6, "your performance during today's engagement has demonstrated capabilities that make you suitable for operations requiring exceptional skill and judgment. We have a mission that could significantly impact the strategic balance in this region." The language was carefully chosen to avoid specifics while suggesting high-level importance. Sarah had heard similar briefings during her Air Force service, usually preceding missions that involved classified objectives and potential political complications. "What kind of mission?" Sarah asked. Williams activated a large display, showing satellite imagery of a military facility approximately 50 kilometers north of the Severny complex. The installation was clearly significant, with multiple aircraft shelters, radar installations, and defensive positions that suggested strategic rather than tactical importance. "This is Crossnav Air Base," Williams explained. "It's the primary staging area for the aircraft and logistics support that enabled today's attack on our facility. Intelligence confirms that the base is hosting foreign military advisors who are providing training and equipment to regional militia groups. The target was obviously a military installation belonging to a national government rather than a militia group. Attacking it would represent a significant escalation that could trigger conventional warfare between nation-states, exactly the kind of incident that private military contractors were supposedly designed to avoid." "You want me to attack a national military facility?" Sarah asked. Control 6 responded via the video link. "We want you to eliminate the foreign military presence that is destabilizing this region and threatening American personnel and interests. The host nation has been informed that their facility is being used for unauthorized purposes, and they have chosen not to take corrective action." The explanation was carefully crafted to suggest legal justification for what would otherwise be an act of war. But Sarah recognized the euphemistic language that officials used when they wanted to authorize operations that couldn't be acknowledged publicly. "What are the rules of engagement for this mission?" "Eliminate all foreign military aircraft and personnel at the target facility," Control 6 replied. "Minimize damage to host nation infrastructure and personnel, but priority is neutralizing the threat to American operations in the region." The mission parameters were clear but unprecedented in Sarah's experience. She was being asked to conduct strategic bombing against a military installation in a country where the United States wasn't officially at war, using weapons and tactics that could kill foreign military personnel from nations that might be American allies in other contexts. "Ma'am, this mission could trigger international incidents that go far beyond regional conflicts in Moldavia." Control 6's response was immediate and uncompromising. "Captain, American personnel are dying because foreign powers are using proxy forces to attack our interests. Your mission is to eliminate that threat using whatever methods are most effective. Political considerations are not your responsibility." The directive placed Sarah in exactly the same position that had led to her court-martial in Syria, forced to choose between following orders that prioritize political considerations over American lives, or taking action that would save lives, while potentially creating larger complications. But this time, the people giving her orders were encouraging aggressive action rather than restraining it. Instead of being told not to engage, she was being given broad authority to conduct operations that regular military forces couldn't perform because of political constraints. Williams provided additional intelligence about the target, including aircraft locations, personnel numbers, and defensive capabilities. The base housed approximately 12 fighter aircraft, 2 transport planes, and an estimated 60 foreign military advisors along with local support personnel. "Timeline for the mission?" Sarah asked. "Tomorrow night," Control 6 replied. "Intelligence indicates that additional aircraft and personnel are scheduled to arrive within 48 hours. We need to eliminate the current threat before it expands beyond our capability to handle." The compressed timeline suggested urgency that went beyond simple tactical considerations. Someone wanted this mission conducted before circumstances changed in ways that might prevent or complicate the operation. Sarah studied the target imagery while considering her options. She could refuse the mission on grounds that it exceeded the scope of her contract, but that would likely result in immediate termination and potential legal complications. She could request additional time to consider the implications, but the timeline didn't allow for extended deliberation. Or she could accept the mission and trust that the people directing her operations understood the strategic implications of what they were asking her to do. Her experience in Syria had taught her that exceptional pilots sometimes had to make decisions that transcended normal military protocols, and the people at Apex seemed to value exactly that kind of independent Judgment. "I'll need detailed intelligence on air defenses and escape routes," Sarah said finally. "If I'm going to attack a military installation, I want to make sure I can get out alive." Control 6 smiled for the first time during the briefing. "Outstanding. Captain, you'll have everything you need for mission success." As the briefing concluded and the participants began discussing logistical details, Sarah realized she had committed herself to an operation that would fundamentally change the nature of the conflict in Mulavia. Attacking a national military installation would force various parties to escalate their involvement or withdraw entirely, depending on their strategic objectives and risk tolerance. She was about to discover whether the people directing her operations were as committed to protecting American interests as they claimed, or whether she was being used as a tool for objectives that might ultimately conflict with her own values and loyalties. The mission briefing for Crossnav Air Base began at 0400 hours, with intelligence updates that painted a picture of a target that was both vulnerable and dangerous. The foreign military presence had grown to include advanced surface-to-air missile systems, electronic warfare equipment, and fighter aircraft that could engage Sarah's A-10 if she wasn't careful about her approach and tactics. "Your primary window of opportunity is between 0200 and 0400 local time," Williams explained, pointing to surveillance imagery that showed patrol patterns and shift changes. "Most personnel will be asleep and the fighter aircraft won't be on alert status unless they've been warned of impending attack." The mission planning was comprehensive and professional, with contingencies for various scenarios and escape routes that would allow Sarah to evade pursuit if the attack triggered immediate retaliation. But the sophistication of the planning also raised questions about how long Apex had been preparing for this operation, and whether her recruitment had been specifically designed to provide the capabilities necessary for this particular mission. "Weapons loadout?" Sarah asked. "Full complement of Maverick missiles for precision strikes against aircraft and critical facilities," Williams replied. 30mm ammunition for personnel and soft targets. 2 500-pound JDAMs for hardened structures if necessary. The weapon selection was designed for maximum destruction of aircraft and facilities while providing flexibility for engaging different types of targets. Sarah would have enough firepower to eliminate everything at the base, but she would also be carrying enough ordnance to level substantial portions of the installation if political considerations required more dramatic effects. Expected opposition during egress? Unknown but potentially significant. If the attack triggers retaliation, you could face fighter intercepts, surface-to-air missiles, or coordinated air defense operations. Your best protection is speed, stealth, and the element of surprise. Sarah spent the remainder of the day studying target imagery, rehearsing attack sequences, and preparing her aircraft for the most dangerous mission of her career. The maintenance crews had repaired most of the battle damage from the previous day's engagement, but several systems remained degraded and would limit her tactical options if she encountered unexpected opposition. Her secure communication system received one final message from Rodriguez before the mission. "Captain, this operation is being monitored by multiple intelligence services. Whatever happens tonight will have consequences that extend far beyond Mulavia. Someone is using your mission to trigger a larger conflict, and you may not survive the aftermath." The warning was ominous but not entirely surprising. Sarah had realized that her mission could escalate regional tensions, but Rodriguez's message suggested that escalation might be the actual objective rather than an unfortunate side effect. She forwarded the message to Victoria Cross with a request for confirmation that Apex leadership understood the potential consequences of the Crossnav mission. Cross's response came within minutes. "Message received and acknowledged. Mission objectives remain unchanged. You are authorized to proceed as briefed." The terse reply suggested that Apex was either unaware of the larger implications or unconcerned about them. Either possibility was disturbing, But Sarah had committed herself to the operation and couldn't withdraw without abandoning the American personnel who depended on her for protection. At 2,300 hours, Sarah began her pre-flight preparations for what would either be the most successful mission of her career or the last flight she would ever make. Her A-10 was loaded with enough ordnance to destroy a small city, and she was about to use it against a military installation that might belong to a nation with the capability to retaliate against American interests worldwide. The takeoff from 70 was conducted under complete communication silence, with Sarah navigating toward the target using GPS coordinates and terrain-following flight profiles that would minimize her radar signature. The night was clear and cold, with excellent visibility that would help her identify targets, but also make her aircraft more visible to ground-based observers. Crossnav Air Base appeared exactly as the intelligence imagery had predicted, with aircraft arranged in precise rows and security lighting that illuminated the entire facility. Sarah could see the foreign fighter aircraft parked in hardened shelters, the transport planes positioned near fuel storage areas, and the administrative buildings where military advisors would be sleeping. Her targeting computer painted precise impact points for each weapon as Sarah lined up her first attack run. The Maverick missiles would eliminate the fighter aircraft. The 30mm cannon would destroy the transport planes and fuel storage, and the JDAMs would collapse any hardened structures that might contain critical equipment or personnel. Sarah took a deep breath and committed herself to an action that would change everything. Her finger found the missile release, and the first Maverick streaked toward a fighter aircraft sheltered in a concrete revetment. The explosion lit up the night sky and announced that Crossnav Air Base was under attack by forces unknown. Within seconds, Sarah had launched 6 additional missiles, each targeting a specific aircraft or facility with precision that left no doubt about her identity as an exceptional combat pilot. The base erupted in flames and explosions as secondary detonations spread the destruction beyond her initial target list. Her cannon runs eliminated the transport aircraft and fuel storage areas, creating massive fires that would burn for hours and produce smoke columns visible for dozens of kilometers. The base's personnel were responding with small arms fire and shoulder-launched missiles, but their defensive efforts were too little and too late to prevent the systematic destruction of their aviation capabilities. Sarah's final attack destroyed the base's radar installations and communications equipment, ensuring that accurate reports of the attack would be delayed and possibly confused. As she turned toward her escape route, she could see that Crossnav Air Base had been effectively eliminated as a military installation. The flight back to Severny was conducted at maximum speed and minimum altitude, using terrain features to mask her approach while monitoring for fighter intercepts or surface-to-air missile launches. Her aircraft's defensive systems detected multiple attempts at radar lock-on, but no actual missile launches occurred during her withdrawal. Sarah landed at Severny 45 minutes after leaving Crossnav, her mission accomplished with devastating effectiveness. Every foreign military aircraft at the base had been destroyed, along with most of the infrastructure necessary to support aviation operations. The threat to American personnel in the region had been eliminated, at least temporarily. But as she shut down her aircraft systems and began post-flight procedures, Sarah realized that she had just participated in an act of war against a foreign nation. The political and military consequences of her mission would extend far beyond the borders of Moldavia, and she might have triggered exactly the kind of international crisis that private military contractors were supposedly designed to prevent. Her secure communication system was already chiming with encrypted messages from multiple sources, but Sarah was too exhausted and emotionally drained to read them immediately. She had accomplished her mission with professional excellence, but she was beginning to understand that professional excellence might not be enough to protect her from the consequences of what she had just done. The war in Mulavia had just become something much larger and more dangerous, and Sarah Mitchell was about to discover whether the people who had orchestrated her presence, there were allies or enemies in the conflict that was about to engulf them all. The international crisis erupted within 6 hours of Sarah's attack on Crossnav Air Base. Foreign ministers were summoning ambassadors, military commanders were placing forces on high alert, and intelligence agencies were scrambling to determine who had conducted precision strikes against a sovereign nation's military installation. The fact that no government claimed responsibility for the attack only intensified the diplomatic chaos that followed. Sarah's secure communication system buzzed constantly with encrypted messages from sources she couldn't identify, intelligence reports that contradicted each other, and warnings that suggested her life was in immediate danger from multiple directions. The most disturbing message came from Lieutenant Rodriguez, whose sources had apparently monitored the immediate aftermath of her mission. "Captain, your attack has triggered exactly the response that someone wanted," Rodriguez's message read. "3 separate nations are blaming each other for the strikes, and military forces throughout the region are mobilizing for potential retaliation. You've been used to start a conflict that was planned long before you arrived in Mulavia." The accusation forced Sarah to confront the possibility that her entire assignment had been orchestrated to provide plausible deniability for an act of war that served hidden political objectives. Private military contractors could conduct operations that official forces couldn't acknowledge, making them perfect tools for triggering conflicts while maintaining diplomatic flexibility for the parties actually responsible. Victoria Cross arrived at Severny aboard a private jet that morning, her expression grim as she reviewed intelligence reports about the regional situation. The normally composed executive looked as if she hadn't slept, and her first words to Sarah confirmed the severity of the crisis they faced. "Captain, we need to discuss your immediate future," Cross said without preamble. "The attack on Crossnav has created complications that go far beyond our original mission parameters." They met in a secure conference room that had been swept for electronic surveillance, but Cross activated additional countermeasures that suggested she didn't trust even Apex's own security systems. The precautions were ominous, implying that their conversation needed to remain secret from people who might otherwise have access to the facility's communications. "Am I in legal trouble?" Sarah asked directly. "Potentially, but that's not our immediate concern," Cross replied. "The immediate concern is that multiple intelligence services now know your identity and location. Some of them want to recruit you, others want to eliminate you, and several want to use you as evidence of American involvement in unauthorized military operations." The frank assessment confirmed Sarah's growing suspicions about the complexity of her situation. Her exceptional performance as a combat pilot had made her valuable to various parties with conflicting objectives, and her willingness to operate outside official channels had made her a perfect tool for operations that required plausible deniability. "What are my options?" Cross activated a large display showing global intelligence reports about the deteriorating situation in Eastern Europe. Military forces were mobilizing across the region, diplomatic communications were breaking down, and several nations were threatening retaliation against unidentified parties responsible for the Crossnav attack. "Option 1 is that you disappear completely," Cross explained. "New identity, new location. Financial support to start over somewhere that has no extradition treaties with the major powers. You'd be safe, but you'd never be able to use your real name or return to the United States." The prospect of permanent exile was daunting, but Sarah had already lost her military career and most of the life she had built as an Air Force officer. Complete disappearance might be preferable to spending years looking over her shoulder for intelligence operatives with unclear intentions. Option 2. You continue working for Apex, but in operations that require your specific combination of skills and willingness to accept extreme risks. The pay would be substantially higher than your current contract, but the missions would be correspondingly more dangerous and politically sensitive. Cross paused before continuing. Option 3 is that you cooperate with American intelligence services to help them understand who orchestrated the events that brought you to Mulavia. That cooperation would provide some legal protection, but it would also make you a target for foreign intelligence services that don't want their activities exposed. Each option carried significant risks and uncertain benefits. Sarah had learned through bitter experience that trusting institutional authorities often led to betrayal and abandonment, but operating completely independently might expose her to threats she couldn't handle alone. "Before I decide anything, I need to understand what really happened here," Sarah said. "Who orchestrated my recruitment? Who planned the Crossnav mission? And what were the actual objectives behind operations that were supposedly designed to protect American energy interests?" Cross smiled grimly. "Those are excellent questions, Captain. Unfortunately, I'm not sure I know the complete answers." The admission was startling. Sarah had assumed that Cross, as Apex's CEO, would have full knowledge of the company's objectives and client relationships. If Cross herself was operating with incomplete information, it suggested that the conspiracy behind Sarah's situation involved parties with resources and authority that exceeded even Apex's considerable capabilities. "What do you know?" "I know that your recruitment was specifically requested by parties who had detailed knowledge of your court-martial and subsequent activities," Cross replied. "I know that the Mulavia assignment was structured to place you in situations that would demonstrate your capabilities under extreme pressure. And I know that the Crossnav mission was authorized by people with authority that supersedes normal client relationships." The carefully chosen language suggested that Cross suspected her own company had been manipulated by outside parties, but couldn't prove it without risking exposure to retaliation from those same parties. Apex might be as much a victim of the larger conspiracy as Sarah herself, despite their apparent role in executing operations that served hidden objectives. Their conversation was interrupted by Marcus Williams, who burst into the conference room with obvious urgency. "We have a problem," he announced without preamble. "Military aircraft are approaching our airspace from multiple directions, and they're not responding to diplomatic communications." Cross immediately activated the secure communication system that connected Severny to Apex headquarters, but the responses she received suggested that the situation was deteriorating rapidly across the entire region. Government forces were mobilizing for potential combat operations. International organizations were evacuating personnel, and several nations were implementing military responses to what they perceived as unprovoked aggression. "How long before those aircraft reach our position?" Sarah asked. 15 minutes for the closest formation," Williams replied. "They appear to be conducting reconnaissance rather than immediate attack, but that could change quickly if they perceive us as hostile." Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that preceded combat operations, but this situation was different from anything in her previous experience. Instead of engaging clearly identified enemies in defense of American interests, she might be forced to fight aircraft belonging to nations that were nominally allies of the United States. "What's the status of my aircraft?" "Fully armed and ready for immediate launch," Williams reported. But engaging those aircraft would escalate this situation beyond any possibility of diplomatic resolution. The choice was exactly the kind of impossible decision that had defined Sarah's military career. She could remain on the ground and risk capture or death if the approaching aircraft proved hostile, or she could launch and potentially trigger the larger conflict that Rodriguez had warned her about. Cross made the decision for her. "Captain, get airborne immediately. Defensive posture only unless directly attacked, but I want you in position to protect American personnel if this situation deteriorates further." Sarah sprinted toward the aircraft hangar, her mind automatically shifting to the tactical considerations that would determine her survival over the next several hours. Her A-10 was designed for close air support rather than air-to-air combat, but it was heavily armored and carried weapons that could engage multiple types of targets if necessary. The takeoff was conducted under emergency procedures, with Sarah launching directly into airspace that was becoming increasingly crowded with military aircraft from various nations. Her defensive systems immediately detected multiple radar signatures, attempting to lock onto her aircraft, but no missile launches occurred during her initial climb to operating altitude. Unknown aircraft departing Severny facility. This is Eagle Flight Leader, came a transmission in accented English. Identify yourself immediately and state your intentions. Sarah recognized the voice as belonging to a pilot flying American-manufactured aircraft, but that didn't necessarily indicate friendly intentions, given the complexity of international arms sales and military assistance programs. Several nations in the region operated F-16 fighting Falcons that could easily engage her A-10 if political considerations demanded it. Eagle Flight. This is Warhorse operating under contract security authorization, Sarah replied carefully. I am conducting defensive patrol to protect American personnel and facilities. Warhorse, you will land immediately at the airfield designated on frequency 285. 7. Any deviation from direct course to that airfield will be considered hostile action. The ultimatum was clear and potentially lethal. Sarah's aircraft was outnumbered and outgunned by the fighter aircraft surrounding her, but complying with their demands would place her under the control of parties whose intentions remained unclear. Landing at an unknown airfield could result in her arrest, interrogation, or worse. Eagle Flight. I am unable to comply with that instruction. I am operating under lawful contract authority to protect American citizens and facilities. Warhorse. You have 60 seconds to comply, or we will consider you hostile. Sarah's defensive systems detected additional aircraft approaching from different directions, suggesting that the situation was expanding beyond the immediate threat from Eagle Flight. Someone was coordinating a substantial air operation designed to either capture or eliminate her, using military assets from multiple nations or organizations. Her secure radio crackled with Victoria Cross's voice from the ground control station at Severny. Warhorse, be advised that we are receiving diplomatic communications indicating that your identity and location have been compromised by unknown parties. Multiple intelligence services are converging on your position. The warning confirmed Sarah's suspicions that she had become the focal point of a much larger intelligence operation. Her attack on Crossnav Air Base had apparently been the trigger for a coordinated response that involved multiple governments and intelligence agencies with competing objectives. Warhorse, this is your final warning, came Eagle Flight Leader's voice. Land immediately, or we will engage. Sarah made her choice. Instead of complying with the ultimatum or attempting to fight superior numbers, she rolled her A-10 into a steep dive toward terrain that would provide cover from radar and visual observation. The mountainous region north of Severny offered valleys and ridgelines that could conceal her aircraft while she attempted to understand the full scope of the threat she faced. The pursuing aircraft followed her into the mountains, but their higher performance came with reduced maneuverability at low altitude. Sarah's A-10 was designed for operations in contested airspace, and she used that advantage to evade multiple attempts at interception while monitoring communications that revealed the scope of the operation against her. All stations, this is Control, came a transmission on a frequency that Sarah's equipment shouldn't have been able to monitor. Target has evaded initial intercept and is operating in terrain that limits engagement options. Recommend ground-based assets be activated for containment. The communication confirmed that the operation against her involved more than air assets. Ground forces were apparently positioned to prevent her escape, creating a coordinated trap that suggested months of planning and preparation. Sarah's secure communication system chimed with an encrypted message from Rodriguez. Captain, You are the target of a multinational intelligence operation designed to capture or kill you before you can reveal information about who orchestrated the events in Mulavia. The only people who can protect you now are the 12 soldiers you saved in Syria. We're coming to get you. The message was followed by GPS coordinates for a rendezvous point in the mountains, along with authentication codes that confirmed Rodriguez's identity and authority. Sarah had 30 minutes to reach the designated location before pursuing forces closed the trap that was forming around her position. Flying through mountain valleys at maximum speed, while evading multiple types of sensors and weapons, was the most challenging navigation Sarah had ever attempted. Her aircraft absorbed hits from small arms fire and portable missiles, but the A-10's legendary survivability allowed her to continue operations despite accumulating damage that would have destroyed less robust aircraft. The rendezvous point was a small airfield carved into a mountain valley, barely visible until Sarah was directly overhead. 2 UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters were waiting on the ground, their rotors turning and their crews clearly prepared for immediate departure. Sarah's landing was more controlled crash than normal arrival, with her damaged aircraft sliding to a stop just short of the helicopters. Ground personnel immediately swarmed her A-10, extracting survival equipment and intelligence materials, while Sarah transferred to one of the waiting helicopters. "Captain Mitchell," said the pilot as they lifted off, "I'm Major Thompson, and we're here to get you out of this mess. Rodriguez sends his regards and wants you to know that all 12 members of your Syrian patrol volunteered for this mission." The helicopter flew at terrain-following altitude through valleys that provided concealment from pursuing aircraft, but Sarah could see evidence of the massive search operation that was developing across the region. Military vehicles, aircraft, and personnel from multiple nations were converging on the area in a coordinated effort to locate and capture her. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked. "Somewhere safe," Thompson replied. "Somewhere that people who orchestrated this situation can't reach you while we figure out how to expose the truth about what's been happening." The flight continued for 2 hours through increasingly remote terrain, finally arriving at a facility that appeared to be an abandoned Cold War installation that had been reactivated for clandestine operations. Sarah's reception committee included Rodriguez and several other soldiers she recognized from the Syrian patrol, along with intelligence personnel who immediately began debriefing her about the events in Mulavia. "Captain," Rodriguez explained, "during the initial briefing, you've been the unwitting centerpiece of an operation designed to trigger a regional conflict that would serve the interests of several major powers. Your recruitment, assignment, and missions were all orchestrated to place you in position to conduct operations that official forces couldn't acknowledge." The debriefing revealed the scope of the conspiracy that had manipulated Sarah's career. Since her court-martial in Syria, her exceptional performance as a combat pilot had made her valuable to parties who needed someone capable of conducting high-risk operations without official oversight, and her dismissal from the Air Force had made her available for recruitment by private military companies that served hidden clients. The Crossnav mission was specifically designed to trigger the international crisis that's currently developing. Rodriguez continued. Multiple intelligence agencies wanted a regional conflict that would justify increased military presence and intelligence operations in Eastern Europe. Your attack provided the incident they needed to escalate tensions while maintaining plausible deniability. Sarah felt sick as she realized the extent to which she had been manipulated. Her genuine desire to serve American interests and protect American lives had been exploited by people who viewed her as a tool for advancing political objectives that might ultimately harm the country she had sworn to defend. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we expose the truth," Rodriguez replied. "We have enough evidence to prove that private military companies have been used as proxies for unauthorized intelligence operations. With your testimony and the documentation we've gathered, We can hold the responsible parties accountable for manipulating American service members for foreign policy objectives that were never approved by Congress or the American people. The investigation that followed revealed a complex web of relationships between government agencies, private military companies, and foreign intelligence services that had been operating beyond normal oversight for several years. Sarah's case became the catalyst for congressional hearings that exposed systematic abuse of private military contracts to conduct operations that violated both American law and international agreements. Victoria Cross was arrested and charged with conspiracy to conduct unauthorized military operations, but she cooperated with investigators in exchange for reduced charges. Her testimony revealed that Apex Defense Solutions had been unknowingly manipulated by clients who misrepresented their authorities and objectives, making the company as much a victim of the conspiracy as Sarah herself. The broader investigation led to the prosecution of several senior intelligence officials who had exceeded their authority in pursuing operations that were designed to advance personal and political objectives rather than legitimate national interests. The scandal resulted in significant reforms to oversight of private military companies and stricter controls on intelligence operations conducted outside normal channels. Sarah's role in exposing the conspiracy earned her complete legal immunity and restoration of her military rank, along with recognition for service that went far beyond normal expectations. But more importantly, her willingness to risk everything to protect the truth had prevented a regional conflict that could have escalated into something much larger and more destructive. The 12 soldiers she had saved in Syria had returned the favor by risking their own careers to rescue her from a situation that threatened not just her life but the integrity of the military institutions they all served. Their loyalty had transcended the institutional failures that had nearly destroyed her, proving that the bonds formed in combat were stronger than the political considerations that too often governed military policy. Sarah eventually returned to active duty with the Air Force, where her experience with private military operations made her valuable for oversight and reform efforts designed to prevent similar abuses in the future. Her court-martial was officially expunged, replaced with commendations for exceptional service under extraordinary circumstances. But the most important outcome of her ordeal was the knowledge that doing the right thing, even when it violated orders or created personal risk, was ultimately the only way to serve the values and interests that military service was supposed to protect. Sarah had learned that institutional loyalty was less important than loyalty to the principles that institutions were created to defend. Years later, when young pilots asked her about the importance of following orders versus following conscience, Sarah would tell them about the 12 soldiers in Syria, the 18 engineers in Moldavia, and the choice between obedience and honor that every military professional eventually faced. Some decisions transcended rank, regulations, and political considerations. When American lives were at stake and you had the capability to save them, that was your duty, regardless of what anyone else told you to do. The system might punish you for making the right choice, but your conscience would punish you forever if you chose wrongly when it mattered most. That was the lesson Sarah Mitchell learned flying A-10 Warthogs in defense of American lives, and it was the lesson she passed on to every pilot who followed in her contrails through the dangerous skies where duty and honor intersected with politics and power. The 30mm cannon that had made her famous wasn't just a weapon system. It was a symbol of the precision, power, and moral clarity that American military aviation represented at its best, when exceptional people were given the tools and authority to protect the values that made their service meaningful. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.